Part 1 of 7. Welcome. Today, we will revisit one of the most mysterious and contradictory chapters of Soviet history, the state's fight against pornography, which reached unprecedented levels during the perestroika era. Over the years, while it was officially claimed that there was no sex, the underground industry of cinemas and video warehouses thrived in secret, turning restrictions into a kind of challenge to the system. At the same time, the authorities played a game of cat and mouse, intensifying pressure. Lists of banned films, high-profile trials, thousands of confiscated tapes, appearing to be a battle with no clear winner. But how effective were the actions of the Soviet security forces? What cunning schemes did this moral struggle conceal? Most importantly, what did all these operations reveal about society's moods and secret desires, which increasingly perceived freedom of expression as an unreachable oasis? In this investigation, we will break down the extensive scheme of repression and underground activity to understand who truly prevailed in this war and what price society paid for the illusion of prohibition. Are you ready to discover what really lies behind the closed doors and curtains of the perestroika era? Then let's begin. In the quiet, glass-enclosed offices and on the slippery intersections of Soviet bureaucracy, something more significant than just the fight against seemingly harmless manifestations of human nature was brewing. During those years, when the country exchanged ideals and future prospects, laws and methods emerged designed to suppress unacceptable expressions. Among them was the ban on sexuality, on intimacy, on pornography. These words, which in 1986 sounded like a verdict, "There is no sex," became a symbol of attempts to control even the most intimate aspects of human nature, turning them into something invisible and elusive, governed by state institutions. Stepping into the atmosphere of that time, recalling the environment in Soviet offices, one can imagine how officials flinched when the topic of sexual expression arose. In a country where official propaganda emphasized that the family was the cornerstone of socialist society and reverence for common values was the highest virtue, there was a strange feeling that beneath these ideas lay something entirely different. During those years, numerous bans and restrictions were tightly held within official ideology, and the fight against the spread of pornography became one of their most vivid manifestations. Accusations and bans did not appear out of nowhere. Since the late 60s, when technological advances in the production of videotapes began to penetrate countries with different social systems, the internal market of the USSR became flooded with foreign information, pornographic video materials. These tapes, smuggled from foreign countries and old markets, like spires in the eye of the Soviet regime, entered secretly through illicit channels, via hidden corners of illegal trade or underground networks. Their distribution was not mass, but was significant enough to attract the attention of authorities and provoke a reaction. The government's reaction was quite systematic and harsh. From that point on, the authorities began to intensify their control noticeably. Not only were pornographic materials confiscated, but lists of prohibited films were also developed. Operatives, armed not only with documentation but also with experience, monitored any attempts at distribution. In the 1980s, the first high-profile trials appeared. Public revelations of those who tried to sell or distribute forgotten banned video cassettes. These processes served not only to suppress illegal activities, but also as a means of intimidation. In practice, the confiscation of tapes was extensive and methodical. According to official sources, around 1988, out of more than 90,000 seized items, about 90,000 were videotapes related to pornographic materials. This was no coincidence. These figures testify to the scale and organized system of the crackdown. The entire country, as if under the watchful eye of the great observers, under control, apartments where criminals could hide their illegal collections, were under constant surveillance. Operational methods were clever and inventive. Officers monitored suspicious apartments, those who frequently entered or left at night. They used techniques such as deploying observers, secretly turning off the lights to avoid attracting attention. It was clear that the struggle was fought not only on a material front, but also a psychological one. Sometimes, electronic means of monitoring the power supply were employed to instantly detect active VCRs. In the autumn of that period, when the communists proclaimed freedom, covert operations to confiscate the most valuable relic, banned tapes, took place in the heart of many Soviet cities. Despite active measures, the campaign continued. Entering the late Soviet era, when politicians and the party were already seriously concerned not only with ideological purity, but also with controlling societal morals, the number of criminal cases increased. The case of Vladimir Gadros, one of the most famous anti-pornography fighters of that time, is well known. His activities became a symbol of the entire broad campaign, in essence a war against any indecent information that could even loosely evade censorship. Looking at these events from an outsider's perspective, one can understand that all efforts to combat pornography reflected not only a desire to establish moral order, but also a fear of the potential spread of corrupting, rotting vice within society. Penalties for illegal distribution of such materials ranged from deprivation of party membership to criminal prosecution. Within party and state structures, campaigns were approved and reinforced to eliminate any manifestation of human sexuality that could breach ideological boundaries across the country, like links in a chain. Yet, some inner voice still raised questions. How effective was this entire system? Part 3 of 7. How successful was the Soviet regime in suppressing the manifestations of human desires, which have always existed and persisted across all cultures and eras? After all, since the appearance of the first videotapes, there were always people willing to risk for the sake of inner freedom. The methods in any case existed, and yet they sometimes seemed utopian. It's impossible to completely destroy internal impulses, impossible to trace and control every human thought. And this is the main hook. How did these measures affect the everyday lives of citizens? From an external viewpoint, it seemed that the borders declared by the state were narrow and unstable obstacles. What opportunities remained for the curious, brave, or unpunished? Were there no ways to circumvent the bans? Were secret societies not formed? Encrypted channels not created? Even in the most severe conditions, it seemed possible to find ways around the system. Thus, strictly enforceable measures to combat pornography were not only means of restriction, but also proof that human desire, ultimately, is too strong to be completely suppressed. Naturally, the entire history of fighting this phenomenon represents an eternal conflict between freedom and control, between natural and artificial. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was on the cusp of change. The social climate, imbued with hope for renewal, simultaneously carried the heavy legacy of a mature socialist regime in which control over information, culture, and entertainment was one of the main tools of power. It was precisely during this period, in the shadow of official retrograde policies and ideological restrictions, that a distinct underground world migrated. Hidden cinemas, illegal video salons, and the market for pornographic videotapes emerging as a result of ongoing struggles between prohibition and people's desire to access illicit, forbidden information. The penetration of videotapes into everyday life in the Soviet Union became a revolution in the entertainment system. By the late 1980s, underground video stores and film clubs, where foreign films and pornographic material were shown, began to spread into the city outskirts and old centralized districts. Their appearance was no coincidence. It was a response to bans, an attempt to affirm personal freedom within the framework of the unyielding Soviet regime. Owners of videotape recorders, those very Soviet suitcase or imported devices, acted as modern smugglers of cultural values. They organized underground screenings, secret showings, and held off-site events outside the city, in abandoned houses, rural huts, where no one could find or stop them. Amid old rural plains, far from urban routines, underground cinephiles held their screenings, turning each evening into a form of small resistance against the system. Video cassette exchanges among acquaintances became a crucial element of this underground world, representing not only an economic but also a social form of interaction. There was no safer way to access pornographic content than through personal exchanges between trusted friends, acquaintances, and neighbors. Handing over a cassette meant not only avoiding fines or criminal responsibility, but also maintaining one's anonymity. In a world where legal access to foreign or even domestic pornographic material was practically impossible, such exchanges became almost the only portal into this forbidden realm. However, this trust also required caution. Each person caught with an illegal cassette faced inevitable repercussions. The prices for pornographic videocassettes were so high that they became a scarce commodity. Possessing several such tapes could provide months of entertainment, but each purchase carried risks, dangerous black market transactions, or possible intervention by law enforcement. Special operations to seize counterfeit cassettes at customs, initiated by internal agencies, were part of the Soviet state's fight against the illegal market. Customs officers and special units operated with the awareness that illegal pornographic media undermined moral foundations, corrupted public consciousness, and violated the supposed moral values of the Soviet system. For those hiding in the shadows, security was paramount. Whether they traveled by train, used couriers, or relied on official transmission methods, they strictly adhered to rules. Surveillance of apartments and entrances, constant changes in delivery routes, and the use of observers, so-called shield guards, all measures that helped avoid detection. Suspicious behavior, noticed by the lookouts, could halt the entire operation, leading to arrests and confiscation of materials. It was no coincidence that a culture of secrecy developed during that time, where every detail could be a sign of danger. Unusual guests, suspicious phone calls, excessive attention to detail. These could all be clues that behind the door was not just an ordinary apartment, but an entire hidden world of illegal entertainment. The 1980s saw the emergence of the first video salons, specialized venues equipped for screening illegal content. These establishments purchased cassettes from imports, often from Western countries. Holland, Germany, France. Smuggling networks crossed borders, overcoming stretched customs controls, and harsh penalties for counterfeiting. Western pornography of that era was distinguished by high image quality and a wide variety of genres, making such salons a noticeable but highly risky target for law enforcement. Part 5 of 7. The thirst for new experiences, curiosity, and the forbidden allure created a steady demand, despite the threats and the risks. Nevertheless, the attempts by the state to combat this illegal market were gradual, limited, and chaotic. Special units confiscated tapes at customs, pressured underground distributors, and carried out raids. But the evidence, videotapes, recordings, testimonies, was like drops in the ocean. The illegal market thrived, adapting to new realities, changing locations, trade mechanisms, and hiding behind the facades of commercial enterprises. Tapes disappeared from sight suddenly and forever, only to reappear soon after in another warehouse, in a different city district. Law enforcement, despite all efforts, could not fully eradicate the phenomenon. It only made it more clandestine, but did not destroy it. An entire layer of this underground world, its methods, its culture, all this demonstrates how complex the confrontation between the state and those who violated its norms was. For some, the fight against pornography was a matter of ideological purity. For others, it was a question of personal freedom, a resistance against strict restrictions and bans. Depending on the methods of concealment, control evasion tactics, as well as the level of technical equipment and the ability to suppress one's own fear, then or now. Could the Soviet system fully eliminate the illegal pornography market? Or did it, like a rainbow shadow, seep through system cracks in waves and flows, becoming part of cultural and informational resistance? These questions, which measure the boundary between lawful and forbidden, between open and secret, remain without definitive answers, because it is precisely in this struggle that the entire spirit of the era, the complexity of human nature, and the pursuit of freedom are revealed. In the dark corners of a Soviet city, during the years when the winds of change were already beginning to blow toward liberalization, when the upper echelons of party committees and security structures debated new ways of fighting and controlling, there were processes unfolding behind the facades of official decisions. They progressed in a marvelous, tumultuous mix between old conservative strictness and the suddenly awakened internal need of society for secret pleasures, forbidden knowledge. And on the stage of this clandestine world, the changes became more and more noticeable. Across the country, discreetly and unnoticed by the wider public, new forms of underground activity emerged, new channels of exchange, and new methods of penetrating materials that were at odds with Soviet morality. After the 18th anniversary of October, when Mikhail Gorbachev took power into his own hands, everything in the country began to change as if by magic, or through the magic of political renewal. Censorship, which for centuries held power over all media and culture, began to weaken, as if chains shackling freedom of speech were breaking. Soon, it became clear. Even in the most rigid years, the Soviet person had an internal resistance, a need to see, hear, learn, and although the authorities proclaimed their unwavering determination to combat pornography and depravity, they were nonetheless forced to admit that control over cultural products was becoming increasingly conditional. Time went on, and with it, the state's attitude towards the boundaries of permissible content changed. It is no coincidence that in 1986, there was a rapid increase in illegal activities related to the distribution of pornographic material. When strict bans were still in place, the growth in confiscations, measured by the number of seized tapes and destroyed underground warehouses, indicated the scale of this phenomenon. It is likely that approximately 10 times more illegal tapes were discovered than in previous years. People, driven by shame and fear, exchanged such materials secretly as if they were dangerous relics of the enemy. These tapes, often confiscated on the streets, in basements and apartments, found all over the country, testified to the fact that, despite harsh measures, the illegal distribution of porn was taking on increasingly professional forms. Against this backdrop stands one of the key figures of those years, Vladimir Gadros. In 1991, he was convicted for underground screening and distribution of pornographic films. His case caused a wide resonance, not only because it was another episode in the fight against the underground, but also because it revealed the level of sophistication and branching of clandestine networks. Gadros became a figure of insults and accusations. Some saw him as a symbol of resistance to the established order, others as a representative of aggressive structures actively suppressing any deviation from rules. However, in the context of political and economic instability, as well as a struggling new ideological system, law enforcement agencies found themselves in a difficult situation. On one hand, there was a need to combat the spread of illegal products. On the other, as censorship weakened, the demand for such materials grew, evidently. They were numerous, constantly changing forms, from simple illegal photographs to complex video projects produced independently on home equipment. The era of underground factories, buying tapes at clandestine shops and exchange points, was gradually replaced by new distribution channels, hand-to-hand, through secret meetings, and via the latest technical means of that time, such as VCRs and video recordings. Mass media continued to operate in the old way, but experts and law enforcement officials, as the situation developed, began to use more subtle and often more dangerous tools. Expert assessments, internal reviews of films, often subjected to professional critique. Sometimes these assessments became not only a means of identifying illegal products, but also tools of ideological confrontation. Inside the government agencies and law enforcement structures, their own games and intrigues arose. Who evaluates materials and how? What is considered dangerous and what is permissible? All of this created a complex system where the boundaries between legal and illegal blurred to such an extent that few could give clear answers. Simultaneously, new forms of underground activities emerged that were difficult to control. Contrary to expectations, people learned to create their own films using home equipment, exchange tapes within closed communities. Independent filmmaking was no longer just a plot for pages in a book, but a reality. Distribution happened not only through personal meetings, but also through intricate networks, hidden warehouses, reselling, and constant search for new channels to evade pursuit and monitoring eyes. The key question lingering in the air at that time was, could the policy of simplified liberalization, initiated in 1986, gradually reduce the criminal nature of distributing pornographic material? Or would it continue to develop in underground chains, becoming ever more clandestine and technologically advanced? Could the authorities find a balance between strict measures and liberalization to prevent an even larger-scale underground expansion? Or would these two paths, one leading to legalization and control, the other to escalation of illegal structures, forever divide society's approach to fighting pornography? However, the deepest and perhaps the most fundamental question was, what determines the level of illegal pornography distribution in the USSR? Is it primarily the result of state activities, its censorship institutions, strict laws, and repressive measures? Or a more complex fact, the internal needs of society, an expression of its inner self that resists any attempts at complete control? Which force prevails, law and regulation, or an unstoppable internal impulse, unwilling to remain within the confines of prohibitions? The answer to this question is key to understanding the entire gray zone that existed during those years. A gray zone where official propaganda clashed with secret desires, and where the fight for morality and freedom took place not only on the fronts of law, but also within human souls.